Hello and welcome to another episode of How to Be a Great GM. Well, you've all been asking for it, so here is my video on how to create dungeons and starship layouts and other technical diagrams on the fly. And I hope that this will help you to create maps that seem as if you've been planning them for years, meanwhile you're making them up as they go along. And there are a few principles that will help us to do this. Now, one of the very first things to do is always have graph paper on hand. And I've got a piece of graph paper here on my second camera, which I hope is lined up. Now, the challenge with making a map of any kind, whether it's a starship or a dungeon or a bungalow or an apartment complex, is that we need to appear as if we know what's going on, and we need to populate it with stuff that seems as if it was meant to be there. So how do we do that? And how do we use the fact that we're drawing the map on the fly to tell a better story? I've got good news for you. It's very simple. It starts with your first room. Every area, everything needs some kind of entrance. And it's up to you to decide how dramatic or how creative or how simple that entrance is. If it's a door, that's easy enough. A door has to lead somewhere. If it's a portal, it too has to lead somewhere. If it is the open maw of a giant asteroid-eating worm, well, that too has to lead somewhere. Now, I know this sounds very simple, but often it is the simple solutions that make for the best dungeons. So, when we look at a dungeon, for example, since that is something that we've been drawing for many years, there are a fundamental number of things that one expects in a dungeon. And so very much like how we look at a setting and decide what is expected of this environment, we need to ask the same thing. In a dungeon, what is expected? We're expecting some kind of central chamber. We're expecting rooms that are barracks. We're expecting rooms that are traps. We're expecting corridors. We're expecting perhaps more rooms of corridors and corridors and corridors. And of course, we're expecting denizens to be in those rooms and in those corridors. And we're expecting, as I said before, traps. If it's a starship, we're expecting airlocks, corridors, barracks, kitchens, rooms, a central chamber known as the bridge of the ship. In other words, whether it's a starship or a dungeon or a castle complex or an apartment building, we are always expecting there to be some kind of central area to which we will move. Now, in the case of a tavern, the central area is the common room, and it has auxiliary rooms off of the side. And again, this comes back to your imagination. What is to the side? What is extra? What is added? What isn't added? What do we need? And the answer, quite simply, is you must use your experience. And this comes through many things. You don't have to go and study blueprints ad infinitum. You simply need to think about the last room that you went into, which was probably the room in your house or your apartment. You've got some kind of entrance facility, you've got some kind of lounging area or mustering area, you've got some kind of barracks or bedroom, and you've got some kind of eating space, assumedly. And even if you don't have many rooms in your apartment, if you live in a cupboard, for example, you will still have little areas designated for basic functions. And if you can get the basic functions right, whilst you're busy filling in the fluff of, oh, it's a barracks, it's a kitchen, it's a dining room, it's a living area, it's a rec room, it's a whatever, your brain can be adding in the rooms that the players don't expect, because obviously that is our goal, is to create spaces that one doesn't necessarily expect. So let's draw a dungeon together. And as we do so, I'll take you through some of the thought processes that go through my mind, and I have got on my list of videos to make is traps and dungeon paraphernalia that are out of the ordinary. So we'll throw in perhaps one or two of those and get to doing that video as soon as possible. So let's look at our page here. We need some kind of entrance. Now, what kind of entrance could we use? We could go with the standard double door, we could go with a single door, we could go with a rabbit hole. It's entirely up to you and the setting of your campaign. And it could be a trapdoor from a inn or a tavern or a room or an abandoned tower above. Whatever it is a entrance. So here we go. Now, the other thing that's important to bear in mind is that you need to look at your graph paper. And this is a trick that I use, is that you need to decide on what scale is this. Is this a massive dungeon? Is it a small dungeon? Is it something that I'm likely to have big events in, or is it something that's really just fleeting? If it's fleeting, keep it small. If it's something that you want to last for a while, use the whole page. Go mad. Use a double page. Use 4 pages. The biggest map I've ever done was what I thought was a relatively to scale model on graph paper of an Imperial Star Destroyer, and it stretched over about 4.5 meters worth of page and paper. We used that for quite a long time until the players said, can we go down a level? Because, of course, this only represents 1 level. At that point, the Star Destroyer blew up and we changed to playing a much smaller game. But the point is, it was all drawn on the fly. So, we look at our page. We realize that we're going to expand out. We also realize that perhaps we've described the structure from outside. In our moment of creativity, we said, oh, you see a strange 3-towered building that stretches and twists around itself and reaches up towards the heavens at least 5 stories high. Okay, well, that's a base to work with. We now have 3 towers that we need to add into this structure. But our base structure is still going to be a fairly standard square with 3 towers attached that will then rise and twist around each other. So, middle of the page, I'm going to have a tower there, a tower there, a tower there, and my main castle-y thing here. Plotting it out in your mind before you start drawing often helps. So we need an entrance into the main tower. Here is my double door. Now, it is up to you to decide on your key. What are you going to use in order to draw this dungeon? I always use a fat square or rectangle like this to represent, in this case, double doors. Or in a normal case, let me do this, a set of single doors. One thing to bear in mind is we as modern day individuals like to have rooms that are symmetrical. Symmetrical comes with a lot of planning, it comes with a lot of opportunity, and it comes with a lot of wealth. A lot of older buildings, and you'll pick this up if you ever visit any kind of state institution, are winding mazes of different types of rooms, different corridors leading half level and down a set of stairs to get to the main level. And this is because of expansion over time. If you look at a cathedral could take 20, 30, 40, maybe even 50 or 80 years to finish building. Over that time, the bishop has died, a new one has come in, and has gone, well, I like what he was doing, but I feel we need to add on an extra 5 rooms because I need a bigger library. Whatever his reasoning, it's changed. The only buildings that didn't really change are the pyramids, because, well, they kind of had a plan and they needed to stick to it. The point I'm trying to make is that dungeons are not symmetrical things, and if you make them symmetrical, well, it might feel more like a modern apartment, a modern structure, than something that has come out of antiquity. Dungeons evolved unless the king decided, I shall build a complete dungeon with everything, all the rooms I possibly could ever need, and I'll make sure that they're all nicely interconnected and make sense. Unless that happened, dungeons grew over time. A Minotaur comes in, he knocks out a wall here, he puts in a partition there, he separates the kobolds from the beholder, he puts in a trapdoor leading down to another cellar which needs to be dug out, and oh well, you know how it goes, these things change. So try not to keep things too symmetrical. One of the other benefits that I like when drawing a map, particularly for players as they're wandering through, is as you are drawing out the shape in your head, that's a visual thing that you're doing. Verbally, as you're drawing out the room, you can say, well, you can see that the room is about 60 foot by 60 foot, and there are these 3 massive pillars that line the middle of the room and each corner. Each pillar is decorated in the shape of the dark god Zagul. Is it? Is it really? Okay, let's go with that. Who's dark god Zagul? Give me a religion check. Oh, everyone failed? Okay, good, we can make it up. Oh, you succeeded. The dark god Zagul was a god that was favored about 5,000 years ago, but fell out of favor when he was consumed by the light goddess, the serpent queen Sihala. You've now just created the whole backstory of this dungeon, because this dungeon was clearly designated to the dark god Zagul, who was defeated by Sihala, the serpent goddess, who was good, apparently. If this is developed to Zagul, well, now we're going to expect a few more things, aren't we? We're going to expect some kind of shrine, some kind of altar, some kind of space where Zagul could be worshipped. We are probably going to also encounter the dark god Zagul, but in a weakened state, because of course he was consumed by Cialis or whatever her name was, I forget. You should write these things down as you go. Bones litter the floor as various human sacrifices have taken place in this room. There is an altar in the very center which looks freshly used. You're now setting up. The room is full of cultists. Because we have cultists will need somewhere to stay, they'll need somewhere to sleep, they will need somewhere to cook food, they will need some kind of water supply. So now we know all the things we're going to need to add. This door, we have no idea where it's going, and we don't need to until the players say, I open this door. Right. A long corridor stretches out in front of you, and then forks to the left and to the right. Strange carvings can be seen along the edges of the walls, mosaic literature of some bygone era, and dust clouds the floor. Right. The point I'm trying to make is, as you are drawing, you can make things up and just build on what you've already established. Zagul, no one's come down this corridor. Why has no one come down this corridor? Well, we'll discover that once the characters have gone down that corridor. Oh, I start walking down this corridor. All right, would you please make a reflex saving throw? Oh, okay, I'll make a reflex saving throw. Why? What happens? These mosaics come alive and reach out towards you, their hands trying to rip into your flesh. They keep chanting the strange sound. It sounds like Zagul, Zagul, Zagul. Reflex saving throw, dodge check, armor check, avoidance check, whatever check it is that it happens to be. Do they succeed? Yes, they do. They get down the corridor, or they get ripped to shreds and take a whole bunch of damage. Again, that's up to you. Why? Well, because we need to make the corridor interesting, so let's put a trap there. Also, we now know that at the end of that corridor will be something perhaps of value, but it's of value to someone who worshipped Zagul, so he would know how to proceed down that corridor. So perhaps it was the chief priest's room, or perhaps this corridor, as they proceed down it, leads into this large, very strange shaped room. The room is made entirely out of glass. Don't be afraid to change up the substances that your dungeons are made out of. Why is it made out of glass? Players, would you please give me an investigation check? Would you please give me some other kind of check? Would you give me pick a thing, delay. So whilst they are busy going through their checks, you are busy going, it's made out of glass because glass doesn't melt in acid. This is a false corridor. It's not leading anywhere but to a trap. You walk in, the door slides behind you, and the room starts filling with a strange liquid. But because it's been 5,000 years and we don't want the characters to die, we're going to make sure that the liquid that comes out is actually oozing out. It has a strange smell to it, and you can see that there are holes all over the one wall through which this substance is leaking. Again, there are carvings on this side of the wall and there are carvings on that side of the wall because now we need to escape, give them some kind of escape route. And it's simply a case of saying, well, if we walked into this room by mistake and we were the high priest, we'd probably want some kind of secret door. So we'll put a secret door there. And if the players are being particularly dumb and pathetic and they touch the ooze and it starts to burn through their armor, well, perhaps the secret door is not so secret, and it leads to a corridor, which we will link up to here. and link up to there, make it secret so that it's a nice little space. And then they come into this room, and this room appears to be used by the high priest himself. And there's a door here. Okay, so they've now come around the back, or of course they could have gone this way, however it works. By the way, if you have secret doors and you really like what's on the other side, don't be afraid to say there is a door ajar in the wall. It appears as if it was a secret door once, perhaps, but thousands of years have worn on their hinges and it has given up. Not hard. And suddenly you've got players walking into your lovely little trap. And of course then this door here becomes a door that's got quite a good lock on it, but that can be picked, or they can just run back down again. Well. This room is clearly the room that the Hierophant used to occupy. There is a large cupboard here with effigies of Zargul carved all over it. There is the remains of a very tattered four-posted single bed here in the corner, and there is a desk. And the desk has a chair in front of it. These are all my little symbols that remind me what it is. That's a bed, if you can see, a pillow, and sort of a duvet thing, and it's four posters, and here's a cupboard, two doors. And perhaps we'll put a chest just there. Next to the four-poster bed is a plinth, and of course what rests upon a plinth but a skull? A skull or a book? It's up to you. If it's a skull, the skull can talk and give them all sorts of information that they might need or have overlooked. If it's a book, it could be a diary. If it's a diary, perhaps it talks about the construction of this particular structure. What we have now done, though, is we have now fairly effectively created tower number 1 that could be construed as being part of this great structure. So we could do that. We can close that off. We can close that off. And we can close that off and come into here. Now, what is in this space? Building material, nothing special. If you really like, you could put a little door in here on the outside, covered over by moss and ivy. And this, of course, is if the characters need to escape and they have nowhere to go, or if you want to insert some kind of dungeon dweller who's lived here all his life, he could live in a little side room that the tower builders made for the gardener. And if the players are in trouble, he could come and open up that door and let them out just in time to save them from certain death. Remember, this is a massive dungeon. You don't want them to die in room number 1. So if you have a little gardener or a gnome or someone who's been tending to the dungeon, well, there we go. He could also walk in and say, "Excuse me, you didn't buy your tickets. You're not allowed in the dungeon without a ticket. Please get a ticket first before attempting to do the dungeon. And on account that you've already done this part, the ticket goes up by 5 silver. Unless you promise to not remember what was in this part of the dungeon and try it again, please." Any tool in your GM's arsenal to delay them exploring is great. Okay, so they've explored that area. Now we come back to this side, and this side, what we're going to do is the exact opposite to the other side, because we want to keep it interesting. And yes, I hear you saying, oh, but what if the dungeon's 5,000 years old? Zargul, who was eaten by Syphilis, or whatever her name was, hasn't been tending it. Everything's dead. The rooms should all be empty, plucked clean by grave robbers. If your dungeons have been plucked clean by grave robbers, if this is dungeon number 3 that's been plucked clean by grave robbers, and you haven't given your characters any reason to suspect that there's a group of grave robbers actively going around the area looting dungeons, and that is their actual quest, if it's just a case of you saying, well, I'm afraid history dictates that these should all be empty, so unless you find the secret room which requires you to make a roll of 480,000 on the dice, which is a 6-sided dice, you can't find it, then I'm afraid you've missed the point of being a GM. Anyway, this corridor's got lots of doors off of it. Why? Well, let's find out when they open the first door. What I like about this kind of method of designing a map or a dungeon on the fly is that you are as surprised as they are. This room, they open up and they discover, because we want a certain amount of symmetry, this was some kind of guard room. So there are some beds here in a barrack style. Something that I forgot to mention is that these grids, you can decide, are they 5 foot by 5 foot? Are they 3 meters by 3 meters or 2 meters by 2 meters? Whatever system you're most comfortable with. So we've got some barracks there, we've got some old cupboards here, and inside the cupboard will be the skeleton of someone who was trying to get out or was playing a game of Let's Find Narnia and didn't win. The skeleton, of course, can come alive and try and kill the party. The beds could have skeletons that rise out of them. It's your call. Have fun with it. Make it different. Perhaps the skeletons in the bed are 2 skeletons locked in an embrace, and there's a bottle of poison next to them. Why would they take poison, you ask? Well, they are in the Temple of Zargul, but that does raise something interesting, doesn't it? You've got a whole bunch of rooms here which you can carry on drawing and describing as some kind of large dining area. To think about, why is it that these 2 killed themselves whilst in the employ of Zargul? Is it perhaps because they realized that Zargul is not necessarily the hero that they thought he was, that perhaps Zargul is some kind of monstrous type of creature? Well, maybe. Is it perhaps that they were actually adventurers who've tried before and failed, in which case, perhaps in this little cupboard here, which contains a suit of magical chainmail, for example, there's a note which simply says, "We came to defeat Zargul and found that he was already dead. You cannot defeat the dead." Well, now that's interesting. You can't defeat the dead. So somewhere in here is Zargul, and he's dead. But is he? Who knows? This is a plot that you're making up on the fly. You'll find out when you get to Zargul. So we've got another room here. This room, we've got a barracks here. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a little secret wall through here. Never be afraid to add architecture. This is going to be a kitchen. This is my symbol for a stove. I think these are very old D&D symbols. And we'll put a table in there. This kitchen, are there any acolytes of Zargul active? Yes, in which case then there must be a smouldering fire in at least one of those with food being prepared. Well, now we've set up that there's going to be people, but they didn't touch the people in the bed. Why is that? Well, perhaps we can indicate that there's salt on the floor here. Maybe. Or maybe there's salt on the floor here. We need to think about this a little bit. What's the salt for? Perhaps the salt keeps the acolytes inside the temple, and that's why they haven't come to this area, because you can only access it from here. And of course from here. So, well, before we even get there, we're going to do a little corridor, and we're going to say, oh, there's salt on the floor. And in here, we're going to make this a dead end, and we're going to make it some kind of preparation chamber. So here's a cupboard drawn rather poorly, and another cupboard. And inside would be robes of Zargul, which they can put on if they like, because mysteriously they've been preserved for 5,000 years. This is another odd-shaped room, but odd shapes don't matter. It could be anything. We've got maybe more barracks, or, well, we've got some guards in here. You peer into this room and it's completely dark. Absolutely black. Magic pervades, and any kind of detect magic will reveal that this is a very dark room. There is some writing above the door frame, and if you make a language check, you interpret this as the room of isolation. Somewhere else, perhaps, we can find a book that talks about the fact that one must isolate oneself from the world, and so this is a room of black. Of course, when they open the door and they see black, you could also say, you hear a voice coming from the other end of the room. "Help me, please. I need help. I can't find my way out." That should freak out the players. And if it doesn't, and they go running in, well, it's hunting season. So now we've got to have some kind of room here, and I always like to put in a room that is full of foliage. Why is it full of foliage? Well, because it was an arboretum. Maybe there's some veggie pygmies that have taken over the world. Who knows? You do, once they've walked into it and filled it up. And so you can just carry on working your way through these various rooms, deciding, well, I need to do something like this because I need to finish it off. And here is going to be a water source, and there's going to be a bathing room here because, well, we need to bathe our people in blood. Well, so it's full of blood. There needs to be some kind of statue here, again to Zarghul, because that's now the theme, who can pour blood into the pool. We need some kind of dais over here for the priest to lord over it. And of course now we have blood golems that can rise out of the depth and attack the party. So what we've done is we've established our 2 towers, as well as this whole character named Zarghul. There's some interesting thing about him being dead or not dead. There's his Hierophant's room here, which you can throw more information into, and then we would continue into the rest of the dungeon. If you wanted to finish, you can now build the tower here, which has got Zarghul's room in it, and of course have your showdown. Or if you wanted to continue, you have a nice, long, weird-shaped corridor that comes off in this direction, splits off down there, comes up here, joins there, has a door here, carries on this way, has another door here, and opens out into a squarish room that has doors here, here, and here. And of course you're describing these murals full of effigies of Zarghul. The players, if they've gone down this corridor, will by now go, oh, well, that's a trap, so there's probably more traps here, and here, and here. There should always, and this is my personal belief, there should always be somewhere a little secret room that contains a lever. Pull the lever and then you can walk through. My reasoning for that is because if I designed a dungeon as a mad overlord, I wouldn't want to have to remember to count 3 steps, hop 1, count 3, hop 1, count 2, hop 1, count 1, hop 1, every single time I wanted to go to the sacrificial blood pool. No. Pull a lever, walk down the corridor, pull the lever, reset the traps. Or, reset the traps when you leave the dungeon and you're going shopping. Whatever the case might be. And so eventually you then lead into this mega chamber that is the home of Zarghul. These pillars carved in the effigy of people in pain line the walls, reaching upwards to the ceiling, and all that you can see is this curved statue of Zarghul, whose eyes light up as you walk into this chamber, and he says, "Welcome, my mortals." And that's how you build a dungeon on the fly, in my opinion. It's about simply asking yourself, what rooms do I need, what rooms make sense, and building a story around it as you go. No, the dungeon doesn't want something and it's not having difficulty getting it, but the person who designed it certainly did, and if his minions don't have some kind of kitchen, they don't have some kind of eating area, they don't have some kind of garden to go and wander in and de-stress in, they don't have a blood pool, and your master lord doesn't have his own chambers, they're going to be a little bit unhappy. Well, anyway, I hope this has helped bring some light to how I create dungeons on the fly and the crazy thought processes that go on in my mind. It's also some kind of adventure creation on the fly for me. For starships, you can go a little bit more symmetrical, and that sometimes helps. And of course, watching lots of science fiction shows will help you come up with the anodyne flux capacitor relay room. And this appears to be another one of those anodyne flux capacitor relay rooms. Oh, you found the sensor habitat control room B. There is something very interesting on the cards. If you haven't seen the Thunderclap video, I recommend you check it out. It's not too late. And yes, we will see what happens on the channel moving forward. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and if you haven't checked it out, have a look at our other channel, the Bacon Battalion channel. That includes how to be a good player, a good role player, as well as the Bacon RPG that I run with my players once a week, every week. And it's an interesting example of different systems and of different playing styles because the characters are quite different. And they've just moved into their second season, I should say, where they are mutants in 1938 Poland. And they're the last mutants on Earth. And it's quite entertaining. Until next time, happy gaming.